Thank you very much. So a couple of caveats before I start. I can't speak for all patients, but what I do say today has been informed by patients that we involve in our day-to-day work. And while I'll speak from a cancer perspective, I also believe the principles I'm going to talk about apply across other disease areas. I guess just another point to echo some of the presentations that we had, that the UK, we are starting from a very strong point, and it's vital that we remain that way. So I'm going to start, if this works. Does it? Wrong one. By telling you a little bit about Cancer Research UK, because I believe this sets the context for what I'm going to come and talk about a little bit later. So we are a research funder. Research is at our heart. We spent over £400 million last year on research. But in 2014, we refreshed our strategy and vision, and we set ourselves quite a bold task. We've made a lot of progress in cancer over the last 40 years, from about a quarter of patients surviving in 1970 to around half of patients in 2010. And we wanted to double the rate of progress. So by 2034, we're aiming to see 3 in 4 patients survive their cancer for 10 years or more. And the reason I wanted to get that across strongly is because you can see from the start that while we are a research funder at our heart, patient outcomes is how we are measuring our success. So how are we going to go about this? So we are focusing on funding in 4 priority areas: in research into prevention, into early diagnosis, into finding new treatments, and optimizing current treatments so that they are more effective and kinder to patients. We also recognize that we have made huge advances in some cancers, but not in others. So we are diverting investment to make sure that we focus on those cancers of unmet need, in particular lung, pancreatic, brain, and esophageal cancer. And we'll do this by funding across the research pipeline. So we'll fund research into all aspects, including basic research to better build our understanding of cancer, all the way through to clinical trials. And we don't just fund research. The directorate that I sit in is called Policy and Information. We have a huge function that provides information to patients about cancer so it can inform their decision-making. And my team in particular, the policy department, seeks to maximize the impact of this research by ensuring it gets to patients as quickly as possible. And one of the ways that we keep patients at the heart of what we do is through our patient involvement work. We have 2 sounding boards as part of the charity's work, one that informs our policy work and one that informs our research and strategy work. And I was lucky enough to go and speak to our policy sounding board as part of preparation for this presentation, so hopefully their views are going to come across strongly. We engage with patients in various different ways, surveys, focus groups. We have specialist panels, so we jointly run a panel with patients, with the British Heart Foundation on patient data, and that's an ongoing thing so we can gain their views. And we make sure that patients are represented in our research committees. So what does this all mean for the life sciences strategy? Well, as we've already heard, the strategy in itself is a fantastic opportunity to strengthen UK science and build on our global reputation. But it has industrial in the title. The primary aim is to build our UK economy, and as a major research funder, we support that fact. We like to think that this will also support the charity sector as well, because we're a substantial contributor to the life sciences sector. But it's also important that this strategy is seen as a route map to improving our patient outcomes and making sure they are matching the world's best. So we need a strategy that doesn't just work for industry, but works for patients that will also benefit from us being a world leader in life sciences. Ultimately, a strong life sciences strategy will help Cancer Research UK achieve our vision of seeing 3 in 4 patients survive their cancer. So we've identified 3 broad areas which cross the pipeline of research that I'm going to talk about in more detail. So that's enhancing our research environment, the better use of patient data, and swift adoption of innovation. And we've touched on various bits of this throughout the day, but hopefully I can bring a slightly different perspective. So let's start with our research environment. So basic research. Now, while basic research may not be on the tip of every patient's tongue, we all know that it's absolutely vital if we're going to better understand disease and discover the drugs and treatments of tomorrow. As you can see here on the right, I think it's a really good demonstration of how we can show the impact of basic research. What would have happened if we didn't fund research into skin cancer back in 2002? We might not have vemurafenib now to treat those patients with BRAF mutation, and that has helped thousands of patients since. So we can demonstrate the impact of this type of research. And it's important that we continue to invest in universities across the country to make sure they continue to do this type of research. One aspect that is important to us as a charity is the government's Charity Research Support Fund. This supports our funding into universities by covering the indirect costs. This has remained flat since around 2010, which in fact is about a real terms decrease of over £30 million. And we're very concerned that this is now having an impact on attractiveness of charity-funded research in universities. And increasing this pot of money would not only leverage more charity research into universities, but will support the discoveries that patients will receive tomorrow. Moving on to clinical trials. When we speak to patients about research, this comes up a lot because this is where they're most involved. The UK is very strong in this area, and NIHR data shows that over 600,000 patients took part in trials last year. Cancer Research UK funds or supports around 250 clinical trials and recruits 25,000 patients a year. So we are successful in this area. And participating in research is really important to patients. So I'm just going to show a short clip from a patient talking about their experiences of participating in a clinical trial. Hopefully it will work.
I went into hospital for a CT scan. A couple of weeks later, came back to see the consultant. He just told me there and then that I had renal cancer. Having taken the kidney out indirectly meant I was cancer-free. When we got told that there was no follow-up treatment, my wife became very proactive. She wanted to know what was available to me. She went online and basically found that there was a clinical trial for renal cancer patients, and we put ourselves forward for the trial. What the trial was for was to obviously see if this new drug was going to suppress the cancer if it came back, or to actually stop it from coming back totally. My reservations were what the side effects were going to be, whether the drug would then encourage some other form of, illness, things like that. So they were my reservations, but I went in very open-minded because that was the only option I had available. The trial was for 3 years. It was a randomized trial, and right from the offset, I never knew whether I was going to take the actual drug or whether I was going to be on the placebo. It felt very weird because the whole idea of being on a clinical trial was that I'd be trialing a drug. But then, to be perfectly honest, there was no other options for me, so I felt that I had to give it a go. The support's been superb. Right from day one, I had a phone number that I could ring them and say that I'm not feeling well, and they would call me in. I feel really good about it. More to the point, not that I've helped myself, but the fact that I've helped research. The advice I would give to somebody that's thinking about it would be to obviously do their research. So do your background knowledge and just be 100% that that's where you want to go.
So Neelish's comments echo a lot of feedback that we get from patients and from the sounding board that I spoke to. Many patients want to give back. As Neelish said, the fact that he helped research, the fact that he could help patients after him. And a basic message that we get from patients a lot is that they want access to the best treatment, whether that's in a clinical trial or not. But we know that we can do better. So this graphic shows the outcome of the latest Cancer Patient Experience Survey. only 27% of cancer patients had a discussion about research as part of their treatment. 85% had seen information in hospital about clinical trials, but we know the conversations aren't happening as much as we would like. And engaging health professionals in this is therefore crucial if we see change. Patients I spoke to said they wanted a standardized offer in terms of research, so that if a trial is right for them, that they are told about it and then they're supported to access it. So coming on to some practical points about how we can support that.
Sorry about this.
That's okay.
I have tried. All right, I'll throw it over my shoulder.
Who is it? I'm intrigued. Okay.
Very sorry to interrupt.
That's quite all right.
I like interrupting people generally, but it's a very interesting presentation. My apologies.
That's quite all right. So firstly, it's important that clinical trials are set up very quickly. The Health Research Authority has come a long way, and trial setup times are coming down. But more can be done in this area, and we'd like to accelerate that progress. We'd like to see the strategy recommending additional resource to the HRA to ensure that it can fulfill its potential. I think Sir Robert said this so eloquently. I'm going to repeat it to a certain extent, but underlying all of this is our ability to collaborate internationally. 1/3 of cancer research UK-supported clinical trials involve a collaboration outside the UK. We believe that aligning with the EU Clinical Trials Directive is something that must be a priority for the next government as they enter EU exit negotiations. Alignment with that directive is particularly important for us to be able to run trials into rarer diseases and into pediatric cancers. And to do all the types of research I've been talking about, again, repeating the same message, but the need to attract and retain the best talent. 46% of CRUK-funded PhD students are not from the UK, and half of our research fellows are not from the UK. We need to make sure that we can remain at the forefront and make sure that we can attract those types of people. So the second priority I'm going to come on to, again, it's been touched on today, is about patient data. And I'm pleased that it's likely to be a key part of the life sciences strategy. This is obviously a huge area of opportunity for the UK, with the NHS as a single provider of care to a whole and diverse population. But it's an underused resource, and we can and must do more to drive improvement in this area. One patient I spoke to made a comment that if she had consented to her data being used, she'd be horrified if it wasn't. And we need to make sure that it is. So what do we want to see happen? We want to see data being used in real time to plan and evaluate services. For example, designing cancer patient pathways, other types of pathways, to make the use of precious resources. The example I've got here is data from the cancer registry, which we're very lucky to have. This data gives us information about how patients are diagnosed. As you can see, this is how we know that up to a quarter of patients are diagnosed as an emergency, which often means they have late-stage disease and have a poorer outcome. So it really drives our attention in terms of what we need to do to try and tackle that and try and improve those figures. There's also a huge untapped potential in research. If we could harness genomic data and link that with treatment outcome data, we might be able to identify which specific patients could benefit from one treatment or another. So there's huge opportunities there. But again, underlying this, and again, which was touched on earlier on today, is the need to make sure this data is used responsibly, that there are safe and strong safeguards in place to protect patient confidentiality. We know from past experience that data initiatives are entirely reliant on support from patients, health professionals, and the public. And we've been doing a lot of work on this over the last couple of years. We, jointly with Macmillan, we ran a project last year looking at how we could improve awareness of cancer data. This involved over 1,400 cancer patients. And as I mentioned before, we have an ongoing patient panel with the British Heart Foundation to advise us on these issues. So the good news is that 93% of patients with cancer support their data being used for research. But they want to know that it's being used, and 83% believe that it's important that they're told that something like the cancer registry exists. And it's a bit concerning that 74% of patients did not know that the registry existed or even heard of it. So that's something that we really need to focus on. These are some quotes that arose from that process. So you can see that although people are supportive, they want to know about it, and that hasn't been happening. This is an issue that's far bigger than cancer. And work by the Wellcome Trust and Ipsos Mori found that only a third of people feel like they have a good understanding of how NHS data is used. So the strategy is an important opportunity to get this right and show what would be possible with this data. But to realize these ambitions, the views of patients and health professionals must be a central consideration. And there's already some fantastic work undergoing, hosted by the Wellcome Trust, called Understanding Patient Data, which we should support. So the last area I wanted to talk about was access to innovation. Again, a topic that's come up today already. Access to treatments, access to interventions is a key priority for cancer patients. So what do we need to see happen? Again, speaking to some patients about this, one patient said that all they care about is having quick access to good quality care. So we need to make sure that happens. They want a fast system that provides access to innovations once they're proven effective. So we believe the strategy needs to set out a preferred option for our interaction with the EMA going forward. The UK needs to remain a launch market. We're positive about the AAR. We want to see that implemented. The accelerated access pathway is a positive development, although it will only look at 5 to 10 technologies a year. So we need to make sure that the other recommendations, which talk about clear pathways for all types of innovation, are implemented. You can see we fund not just medicines, we fund research into radiotherapy treatments, into surgery, into new diagnostic techniques. How do we get these types of innovations to patients quickly? We're deeply concerned, therefore, about the budget impact test, and patients that we've talked to are also similarly concerned. A potential 3-year delay is unacceptable to cancer patients. Some patients simply don't have that time. And we also believe, as has been said earlier today, that it undermines the recommendations of the Accelerated Access Review and the positive reforms to the Cancer Drugs Fund that were seen last year, which see NICE making decisions much earlier in the pathway of a drug. So we hope that we can come to some sort of solution here, which looks at an innovative way to address the affordability issue. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was about access once these technologies are approved. Patients say they want treatment that will provide them with a good outcome, but crucially, that is kind to them. Quality of life is really important. We're all excited about the prospect of about precision medicine, tailoring treatment to the genetic makeup of patients' diseases, producing better outcomes, fewer side effects, the right treatment for them. However, we know that some of these treatments are already available on the NHS, but they're not being delivered to the right patients. This is some data that we published in 2015, so it's a little bit old now, and things have moved on slightly. We identified that some patients, where there was a precision drug available, were not receiving a molecular diagnostic test to indicate whether that drug would be suitable for them. So we need to make sure that a service is put in place in the NHS so that when these drugs are available, they are NICE approved, that they actually get to the right patients. And this is about efficiency in the NHS as well, making sure it makes the best of their resources. The last thing I'll say on that is that we believe a panel approach is needed, because a service that provides molecular diagnostics could indicate whether a patient gets one treatment or another, but it could also indicate whether a patient goes on to a clinical trial, therefore supporting precision research. So just coming back to where I started. So in summary, we want to see the research base strengthened. We want to see increased investment in basic research and supporting more clinical trials. We want to see the better use of patient data, and we want to see quicker adoption of innovations. I hope I've shown that patients can be really strong advocates for these aspects and can be strong advocates for the strategy itself. And ultimately, as I said, a strong strategy can help Cancer Research UK achieve its aims. So I'll leave you on this thought. Cancer Research UK measure our success on patient outcomes, and perhaps the life sciences strategy should do the same. Thank you.